mythology. I mean, I've been there countless times, but in my dreams it looks nothing like it actually does. It's just amazing, dazzling place that seems to be carved entirely out of marble. But when I went back, it wasn't Jerusalem that struck me that way. It was Tel Aviv. I found myself walking around Tel Aviv and just feeling like I was walking in a dreamscape in a really good way, where things were calling out from this distance that you feel you really belong to, in that way that you feel in dreams, that recognition of this thing that's calling to you. It was even down to just the homeliest details, like the texture of tree bark. Trees are kind of, I don't know what you would call it, more tropical. Things are very gnarly and twisty, and the leaves are kind of tough, and things have just popped out at me. And they continue to. I look forward every time to going back to Tel Aviv and just kind of sticking around there and just walking the streets.
Have you lived in Israel in the past 20 years?
Oh, no, sir. No, not since we left.
How does it affect you emotionally, being in Israel as opposed to being in the United States? You mentioned the textures and the dreamlike state, but for instance, the short story in your book where they were stuck underground as they were going on a tour, that felt for me, that evoked in me Israel. But the stifling feeling. But I'm curious, what are your feelings being in Israel as opposed to United States?
Well, that story I was inspired by an experience that I had as a girl, and I can't remember. I think it was a trip that we took, not as a school actually. In the story it's a school, but the trip that I actually took was in a youth movement, Bnei Akiva, Children of Akiva, which is a Zionist, Orthodox movement. And we went through some. It was I think an escape tunnel. And I experienced what, in retrospect, I know is claustrophobia about halfway through, where you just feel like you might never get out, and it's just absolute misery. But I didn't freak out because I was much too shy to do that. But that was then. That was just the feeling being kind of oppressed by both the geography of it, or rather the geology in that case, and the past. Now, when I go back, it's a complex of emotions, but I'm going back as a secular person. I was raised religious there, and I go back as a sort of tourist, with sort of more I don't know, what's the word? Not perspective, but I don't know, epicureal sort of perspective, and I just as desirable attributes and places. I think that there of Israel that really have what I always seek out and don't always find, which is just the outwardness of the culture, the fact that so much happens on the street, that the barriers between people seem thinner. When I was there when I was pregnant, I spent some time there, about a month, and I was pretty pregnant by then. And people would just stop me and say, "Oh, you have a beautiful pregnancy," and by which they were really like evaluating my stomach, the way I was carrying my baby. People at liberty to just say, it's sitting nicely. It's a kind of familial feeling. Of course, it can get really, it can have invasive implications also, but I experience that as a relief because in America I do feel kind of overwhelmed by the restraint of the culture sometimes. I felt more so in the Midwest than I do in the Northeast, but even here.
And okay, when you fly back to America, aside from the restraint feeling that you mentioned, how does it feel for you to be back in the United States?
Right now, I just want to say cold. America is my home too. I've always had a foot in both cultures. So there's always that feeling of relaxation, of coming back. And it's funny because I've ever since moving to Boston, I've made a lot more Israeli friends than ever before, and so I'm become more diversely familiar with the Israeli expat experience than as opposed to just through my own experience. And often, Israelis born and bred who now choose to live here, they also feel that relief, of sort of they like that restraint. They like being alone somewhat. They like more orderly. They like the relative sparseness, less emotion, less happening, more in control of your experience, for better or for worse.
Yeah. Yeah. When I go to Australia, I feel like I'm going to one culture, and then when I come back to America, I'm feeling like there are so many cultures all around me. That's one of the things that jumps out to me.
Now you live in LA, right?
Yeah. There's not like one culture here in LA or America. When I go back to Australia, it's pretty much one culture.
Uh-huh.
And I'm wondering about Israel. I guess there'd be religious and secular culture would be the dominant two cultures there.
Yeah, but there's many other layers, of course, because Jews, the Jewish population arrived from so many different places,
right.
So that even I, as a girl growing up in, one of the more insular kind of settings in the Orthodox community, where we kind of looked from the inside out at fellow Israelis, fellow Jewish Israelis. Looking at the kids and the adults who were part of the secular world, they were the majority. We were the minority, and that seemed to us like such an alien world, an errant world, frightening, attractive, everything world. But even within our little cocoon there, you had girls whose parents had come from Yemen, girls whose parents had come from Morocco, girls whose parents had come from Persia, minority of what they called Anglo-Saxon Jews. That would be the Americans and the English, one Irish Jewish friend, and South African, Australian. And then, those that we, now I don't, but at the time you kind of considered the default Ashkenazi Jews who parents from Russia, Germany. I mean, there are so many different cultures, even in that tiny patch of this society, that when I later moved, immigrated and was in the States. I found myself in the States. I found myself earlier in England, and I found people, interested in Israel and having very, very strong opinions about Israel. More often than not, just perceiving the people to be incredibly uniform. basically expecting that everyone in Israel